Are you feeling disappointed with Pokemon Sword and Shield? If so, do you feel bad about it? If you do, then don't. You've all heard the complaints, especially from me. But why is it that these games are such a disappointment? With this game looking more or less like an expanded Sun and Moon, why is it that there's so much disappointment in the air? Surely getting the same formula as before, which is tried and true, can't be a bad thing, right?
Wrong.
At least in my opinion. Let's answer the all-important question today. Why are these games so disappointing? And why I feel your expectations should have been higher when it comes to these next-gen Pokemon titles. I believe there's a number of factors that contribute to this, and I'm gonna try my damn hardest to list them all. So let's do it. Pokemon Sword and Shield should be better than this, and here's why. One thing I always see people defend is the fact that these games look better than Sun and Moon. While this is of course incredibly obvious, I don't think the difference is too big. With that said, people need to remember how weak the Nintendo 3DS really is. The system had some incredible games, but it was also limited due to its subpar hardware specifications. That's why it's so great that we now have the Nintendo Switch, a home and portable console hybrid. A portable machine that's able to run home console quality games, and a decently powerful home console to boot. Comparing the 3DS to the Switch, there's absolutely no competition here. If we're having to graphically compare a fairly new home console game to a 3-year-old portable game, don't you think there's something wrong there? It should be nothing but a given that Sword and Shield look better than any of the portable Pokemon games before it. Yet this is being used as a way to further the fact that the graphics are acceptable. Well, I'm sorry, but I don't find that acceptable at all. We should have expected far beyond this. We should have expected at least work alongside Game Freak's other HD titles such as Town, or at the very least, graphics comparable to the once Wii U exclusive Pokémon Tournament, which I would argue looks a lot better than these games. Yeah, it's a different genre of game, but it's also on the weaker Wii U compared to the Switch. Hell, I'd say the Let's Go games look better than this, though I still don't think they look great. I'm not expecting them to be the greatest looking games on the system. I was just expecting a polished up, pretty decent looking Pokemon game. A Pokemon game that would far exceed the graphical capabilities of past Pokemon titles. But to me, it looks far too similar to Sun and Moon that there doesn't really feel like there's a leap here, if there's a leap at all. With each new Pokemon generation, there was always a big leap in the graphics. Whether that be going from black and white to full color, GBA sprites to actual 3D models for buildings, and even on the same system, Pokemon Black and White added animated sprites and much more detailed environments that made it stand out distinctly from Diamond and Pearl. What about Sword and Shield stand out from Sun and Moon? Yeah, we do have the wild area, which I don't think is bad, and is perhaps the only case of this game taking advantage of the Switch's hardware, but it doesn't really look like something revolutionary. There's region-specific gimmicks like Dynamax, but it's yet again another nuke button, just like how Megas and Z moves were. So it doesn't feel all that fresh to me, but I do know that that's a very personal opinion of mine. There's no new art style here. Maybe there's a bit of cell shading, but that's about as much different as I can gather. But that's basically nothing. Bottom line is, nothing about these games feel distinct at all. And it's the first time in the series that this has actually happened, which is rather disappointing if I do say so myself. Yeah, this is quite a big one. First-party 3DS games always retailed at $40, which was always pretty nice to me, but with the Switch technically being a home console, all games are now jacked up to $60. While this has been fine for the most part, with huge console games like Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey, do Pokemon Sword and Shield really seem like they match up to these two games? Not only do they look similar to 3DS games, but we have the talked to death lack of the national dex. So if anything, we're getting less content, but we're paying more? Of course, the actual Pokémon isn't the only content of these games, but they were a pretty huge chunk of it, and now a lot of that is simply gone. I don't see anything here that actually justifies the game being $60 at all. I could easily compromise here. If the game had the inclusion of another region like Kalos, then I'd absolutely excuse this price, as working on 2 regions for one game would be pretty tasking. It could also explain why the national dex is absent if they're having to create an entire region with new models and all. Of course though, I don't actually see this as being a genuine potentiality, but it's always nice to dream, isn't it? From what we've seen so far, I don't see how the amount of content in this game differs from that of Sun and Moon, making the price point feel a bit unacceptable to me. And if the price point is related to them having to create higher quality models and textures, well, you already know the story about that. Other tidbits I'd like to include. The walking animations for all Pokemon were actually in the files of Sun and Moon, so that's a lot less development work for Game Freak, and shows that they didn't have to create walking animations for the Pokemon in Sword and Shield. There's of course the fact that Game Freak have such a high budget that they could easily hire new people, but it seems like they haven't done that too often in the past, so I wanted to keep things as realistic as possible, even if it should be incredibly easy to hire new people to do the work that they can't. But what can you do? And I'd like to add that gameplay wise, there's really nothing to say, as these look like the same games as usual, and looks like it plays almost identical to Sun and Moon, but we'll see how that plays out in the future. Is it wrong of me to have expected more than what we've been given? Considering the circumstances, I really don't think so. I know I've been complaining a lot about these games, but I just don't want to settle for less for a series that shows some incredible potential. Right now though, I'm not seeing that potential being reached at all, and I pray that Game Freak takes into consideration all of this feedback to improve upon the next release. But for now, all we can do is wait and keep critiquing.